Hello everyone, Flandre here. Today we are going to talk about Russian and deactivated and Russian simulation firearms. These are guns that were essentially, or are I should say, on the Russian market for civilian purchase that don't require any licensing. They are unregulated on the market, and anyone can go to a store in Russia and just buy one of these. Recently you may have seen some gun tubers with something like the VSS Vintorez or an AK-12. And essentially what those were these particular either deactivated or simulation type firearms that were unregulated on the market, and they obtained them, basically rebuilt them with live fire barrels that can shoot real ammunition, real bullets, and called it a day essentially. Unfortunately, I have suspicions that they're not going to last very long because these particular firearms weren't really firearms. They're not real guns. They were essentially built, the ones that most people are building off of, they were built for blank ammunition. In particular, we have like Brown Bear here. A lot of them were designed for this. This is very commonly available on the Russian market. Both in 7.62 by 39 and 5.45 by 39, and the simulation firearms that are on the Russian market are built specifically for those blank rounds. Another common type of Russian kit that you see out there on the market these days are also deactivated. These are typically called MMG on the Russian market, that are essentially deactivated. They are not designed even to shoot any projectiles. They are put together from reject parts and made for display. That's all they really are for. They're not designed or meant to be shot, and there's a bunch of those on the market as well. Needless to say, because these particular, essentially I'm going to call them firearms, were designed for either display or for blank use only, there isn't a whole lot of quality control that goes into them. And that's why I speculate when I see a lot of the videos out there, people making of these, that the data that they have is honestly probably pretty bad, because these aren't really, these are civilian essentially firearms that don't shoot real ammunition. They aren't designed for it. And converting them to shoot live ammunition might actually not be quite safe if you're using the deactivated, or I should say if you're using the simulated parts, as they call them. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But that's basically where these like new Russian like AK-12 and VSS kind of kits kind of came from. I'm not sure, especially if we're talking about the deact ones, which are, those ones are labeled CY by Kalashnikov Concern. So you'll see two. There's CY, which are deactivated MMGs. Those will have cut bolts and cut pistons. They also have cut trunnion lugs as well. I don't have one here. But if you see a kit that's designated as CY, those are the deactivated versions. Complete reject parts. So a lot of the kits that people are building out there, they're getting Bulgarian trunnions, they're getting Bulgarian bolts, and they are getting these deactivated kits, and they're putting them together, reactivating them. And, who knows, about the quality of the dust cover, who knows about the quality of the parts. When you hear about people saying, oh, they don't hold zero, or they're causing this issue or that issues. I mean, how can that data really be trusted when they're building these using essentially reject parts from the Kalashnikov Concern plant? So as far as we know, the data that's out there are on these deactivated or CX blank guns that were sold to the civilian Russian market that weren't really meant to be shot with live ammunition. So that's just kind of what's out there. So now let's talk about kind of the differences out there in terms of what people are doing in order to build these, and kind of what Kalashnikov Concern did to make these legal on the civilian market. So up here, for example, I have a CX kit right here. So this is a blank fire kit. So you see here is what looks like a real live bolt. Has a firing pin and everything. And a bolt carrier here. Of course, the piston on this one was removed, but you get the idea here. I actually believe this bolt carrier is from a CY kit, and this was from a CX kit. The bolt doesn't match the carrier, and typically the pistons are cut, so on the CY deactivated kits, so it would make sense that they would remove and not ship the piston on that one. But we see here the bolt and the trunnion. And the important thing to note here is even though the bolt looks all fine and dandy, it's actually not. And if we look closely at this bolt right here, you'll notice on the top here it looks a little funky. And the reason it looks like that is because this was actually welded. They put a whole bunch of weld here and then machined that flat. So you can see there kind of the bead of the weld. And you can see how it's machined flat on the top of this lug right here. And the reason they did this is so that this bolt won't actually fit into a live firearm, and the trunnion is also cut to accommodate for the blank fire bolt. So the question is, are these bolts even good? Have they been compromised by being welded in this spot here? It's one of those things, like, we don't know. I mean, probably. And so they made a change to the trunnion here in order to fit that bolt, where they cut the top here a lot wider so that that expanded lug there can fit into it. What that means, though, is that this lug on the trunnion right here, that lug is cut. You can see how much it's cut there. And if we take this is a virgin Bulgarian one, trunnion here, you can see just how much more material the Bulgarian one has on that lug there compared to how much material is on this Russian blank fire version. So what that means is when the bolt goes into place and rotates, the amount of contact that that lug has on that lug right there is not a whole lot. It's quite small in comparison to a live fire version. And on top of that, it's probably weakened because it's cut, and the lug there is weakened because it was welded. Who knows about heat treating or annealing that they did on these. So that is the main problem with these CX kits, is the fact that they cut those lugs there. So if you look at another Bulgarian trunnion here as well, you can see just how wide that difference is there. So if I take a live bolt, let's use this one right here because this one's definitely Bulgarian. So this is a Bulgarian bolt. And then I put that into the CX trunnion here. You can see just how much room that lug has in there, as opposed to the Bulgarian one, which is nice and snug. The Russian deactivated, or I should say blank fire one, it's not. So basically, to use this trunnion, you need the CX bolt with the CX trunnion, and unfortunately that means that your lug's going to be welded and your lug's going to be cut. So, well, there's a lot of different varying opinions out there. Some people say it's fine, it doesn't really matter, there's enough contact in the lug that's cut on the trunnion, just get a Bulgarian bolt, you should be good to go. Some people say you can use the original trunnion and you can use the original bolt and there's no problem. There's people who have and they're shooting them. I've seen other people who have built them like that and their legs started deforming. So I personally wouldn't trust it. There are people who are and who claim their guns are shooting fine and they're not having any problems. It's just up to you what you think is worth and whether or not you think it's worth your gun blowing up or not, I suppose. For me, I'm switching mine out with Bulgarian trunnions, as I know they're good. They're not expensive because unfortunately 74 kits have dried up, which is unfortunate, but that's what I'm doing, is Bulgarian trunnions, Bulgarian bolts, and the CX bolts, I don't know. People pay money for them still, so that's their decision. So they can have them, I suppose. That being said, the CX kits that do have the bolts and the trunnions, they are better. The parts weren't just random reject parts that were rejected and then built into essentially a firearm or a blank gun. But you still need to source a trunnion and a bolt, and the CY kits, which are the deactivated ones, are a lot cheaper. So, you know, it's up to you to make that decision on whether or not you want to build on a CY or CX kit, or mix or match both of them in some way, shape, or form. There are a lot of mixed-matched kits out there that were, I don't know why, I guess a lot of the people that were importing, or were trying to get these imported, were cutting up a bunch of guns and then sending them out with, basically, you see a lot of the kits having, like, non-matching, like, bolts, for example. So, that's the whole thing on the difference between the CX and CY kits in terms of these AK-12 kits that I'm in particular talking about. Let's talk a bit about the VSS, because all of the VSS kits out there are CX kits, and these are not made by Kalashnikov concern. These are not made by quote-unquote Malat. These are made by Malat Arms, which is different than Malat that we all know that makes Veprs. A lot of people out there were thinking, oh, these are made by Malat, so they must be pretty good. And in fact, that's not true at all. In fact, the original VSS, the VSSs that are currently being made in Russia, are made by Tula. In fact, Tula makes a civilian version of the VSS. However, they don't make any deactivated CY or CX blink type firearms on the market. So the only ones that are on the market that are unregulated are the Malat Arms version. Now, Malat Arms in Russia is a company that formed specifically to essentially create these type of firearms. Their primary market are, actually their entire market is civilian, but their primary market are blink guns and 366 TKM, which is a essentially a shotgun round. They make these smoothbore rifles that get around Russian law in terms of needing to have you need to have a shotgun license for 5 years before you can buy like a rifle. So what they do is they make rifle-like firearms, or they bore out rifles, make them smoothbore, and they chamber them in this 366 TKM, which is a larger round on a 7.62 by 39 casing, and that allows people to essentially own firearms that are rifles but actually shotguns. And they don't have a very good reputation in Russia, actually. Or I should say Malat Arms doesn't have a very good reputation in Russia. If you look on the Russian forums, on Russian YouTube and stuff, people don't have the best things to say about them, and there's a reason for that. Their quality control can be quite lacking at times. And that's true also with these VSS rifles, unfortunately, as well. Now, these VSS rifles were designed as blink guns. These were not designed for live fire. They do now have a live fire version of this that shoots 366 TKM, of course, but this particular firearm was designed for blink fire. And I'll show you why. For one thing, we have a cast receiver as opposed to a milled receiver, which you'll see on the Tula Arms version. They do have this nice quick release stock, which the Tula civilian ones don't have, and the reason why they don't is because to remove the stock, it also requires you to disable the trigger mechanism. Malat Arms did make a mechanism that disables the trigger when the stock is removed. Tula Arms didn't want to do that, so they didn't make the stock removable, and that's basically why. Anyway, so you can remove the dust cover. And the first thing that you'll notice is it's like a real VSS, right? It has the same mechanism so far, right? And it's a good copy of a VSS, but it's not a VSS, I can tell you that. It's a VSS clone, that's what it is. For one thing, oh no, that's not right. A VSS is a linear hammer. This is a striker. That's not exactly the same. A linear hammer would be basically the same thing here, except on the end here, the firing pin would be a separate part, and this would be the hammer, and it hits the firing pin. In this case, it's just a pure striker. The bolt system is quite a bit different here. It's not really removable. Well, it is if you Dremel and punch out some pins and stuff, but it's kind of all captive, and they didn't really make it user serviceable. It's very dirty because I've been shooting a lot of blinks with it. But this whole system here is close, but it's not exactly the same. The dimensions are slightly off. There are small things that are different. And the main thing we want to look here is at right here, where you see the bolt face. The bottom here is welded all up here to make this big old lug to once again conform to Russian law and standards for blink fire guns. I don't know about the longevity of these bolts for live fire. I have been exclusively shooting blinks out of this, and I already see quite a bit of wear on these lugs. There is some deformation. They are peening here. And this is shooting blanks, which are a lot less powerful than real ammunition. They don't have nearly as much pressure as real ammunition. I've even tuned, this gun was actually overgassed from the factory. I had to tune it down in order to try and reduce wear, because I had an issue on my striker here where on the back you can probably see it started deforming pretty bad back there. And that deformed enough that it formed like a little ridge here, which was causing it to get stuck in the back on the trigger so it wouldn't reset, and I had to like force it to reset, and I had to grind that down in order to allow it to reset properly again. So that was an issue that started happening because, once again, bad quality control, probably poor heat treating on the part. Probably the same thing with a bolt, and that's why my bolt-like lugs here are starting to deform some. I managed to fix the gassing issue on it, so I haven't seen any more deformation on it, but I just speculate about how long, like if you're to shoot live ammunition, how long these would last for, especially suppressed when you have a lot more gas and a lot more pressure coming back in the system. So we can look here inside, and you see on that barrel extension there, you can see where it's been cut really wide down there as that one big lug has to clear, and it basically rotates and locks in slightly differently than it would have been if it was a live fire. So it's a nice clone, but it's not really exact. Like if I try and take this barrel shroud off right here, we can see here it's not a quick release like the originals. It has to screw off because they made design changes and design decisions to make something that was a lot easier to produce for a civilian product. The original VSS would have a nice quick detach shroud here, which this one does not. Now this one does have a fake barrel in it. It has cross pins that are welded on the inside that make it impossible for it to shoot live rounds. There's no rifling. The bore is way too large for any basically round to pass through, or the stabilizer even go through it properly. It's really just to allow gases to go through, escape, and make, well, I guess make a noise, but then it's supposed to be suppressed. So it's just to simulate a actual real VSS. But yeah, it's a nice clone and everything. I mean, I use it to shoot blanks. That's all I really want it for. I use it for milsim games and whatnot, things of that nature where, you know, it fits that role. I can shoot my blanks, and it's safe to shoot at people because this is not a real firearm. This can't shoot live ammunition. So it can't even chamber a live round. The chamber is set in such a way where it can only chamber the 7.62x39 short blanks. So, and these magazines too are designed specifically for 7.62x39 short blanks. So it's great as a toy in that regard, and that's what I use it for. I just speculate about the people who have converted these to shoot live ammunition, about how long they're going to last, or if they're going to blow up or not. So, or their legs are going to shear. So, I find it crazy that people are spending like, what was it, like $15,000 I think I saw one go for on Gunbroker? That's crazy. These aren't worth $15,000. These are $800 in Russia. So people are absolutely on crack or something, I don't know. Or they just don't know. They don't know that these aren't real. That they're clones that work great for blanks, but live ammunition, I mean, they might shoot live ammo fine if you like get a new bolt like manufactured, or you figure out the specs of the metal and are able to heat treat it properly so that it's able to withstand the pressure of the regular firearm. If you're able to basically get the barrel extension, manufactured to a spec that would work for live ammunition, I think then they would work pretty great. I mean, I foresee maybe at some point someone making some new bolt heads for these. Because I'm sure eventually people are going to start having problems when they start breaking. So, well, I guess we'll see. We'll see how it goes. For now, I'm just using it for blanks, so that's all that really matters. These AK-12 kits and a lot of the other deactivated or blank kits that are on the market can be made into working good live fire guns as long as you have proper trunnion and proper bolts. In my opinion, I mean, there's people who have other opinions, but they can have those. I choose to be safe. And that is the answer, the truth, to Russian deactivated guns, Russian blank guns, these new kits you see on the market, the guns that you see gun tubers running around with recently, and kind of what they are and where they came from. I hope you all found this informative, so as always, have a good one.
あなたのことを